Bill Ramsey, convener SNP CNE. Could I make a comments that might take a minute or two? I'll keep it as brief and put your hand up and I'll shut up 10 seconds after you put your hand up. A general comment, and this will be seen as somewhat pejorative and negative, but you said in your introduction that one of the issues was to unpack, I think when you didn't use the word unpack, the position of the political parties in Scotland, and of course the Greens have a sound position on this, sounder than my party, the SNP, and certainly even more sound than Labour. But I think the fact that we have no speakers from these parties, there's an intellectual dissonance there. If we're actually going to discuss taking forward these issues within these parties, then we should be hearing from people within parties. So I think in terms of Labour, quickly, Paul Mason's decision of the left in Labour to accept Trident and park Trident for the bigger Corbyn project as an interesting decision within the Labour Party, and maybe that needs to be unpacked with people in the Labour Party. Within the SNP, there's one or two background comments that need to be made, because, for instance, the SNP, the idea of the SNP has always been anti-NATO is factually incorrect. I'm 63. And the SNP is actually more varied in its left-right oscillations than people remember. In the early 1980s, when our conferences were small enough to be places like Glossy, the SNP, I saw a bit of film of it in the BFI place in the West End of Glasgow, actually it reminded me that actually the SNP position then was actually pro-NATO. It switched in the 1980s to an anti-NATO position. Bear in mind that when the SNP switched to a NATO position in the conference of 2013, it only did so by 15 votes. Because Salmon used the very thin patronage structure within SNP. You're a researcher, you're an assistant, you're an MSP 50 grand a year, you're an MP 60, 70 grand a year. But he only won it by 15 votes, and he had to cash in the patronage structure to win it. And the leadership of the party, and I won't say who it was, told me when the party membership went under over 100,000, said to me off the record, I wonder if we could hold one NATO position now. But the leadership will ensure that the NATO issue won't be debated for some time. But I think meetings like this are really important to try and unpack that and take it along. Although the SNP is within NATO, in the sense that that's a position, there is an issue with the Westminster group. They are young, they are inexperienced, and they are winding down like one-stars liaison officers from God knows who. But it's not just that. Within the NATO position, and I'm particularly interested, really interested, in the position of colleagues from PAX here, because there's a pragmatism which, in terms of the current SNP, speaks very much to the current SNP position, which must be the line that the SNP use at the moment, because there is no other, because they want us to take an anti-NATO position so that we don't start to unpack the complexities within NATO. I'm anti-NATO myself. But at the moment, the SNP group in Westminster have been taken to Ukraine, and they're running with a hardline NATO position. They're not even running with the French-German NATO position. I'll give you an example. At the Defence Select Committee meeting of May, the one SNP person on there got the second question, and I found the one SNP person in the Defence Select getting the second question. Why is that? Because he actually gave the set-up question, a set-up answer for Gavin Williamson, who castigated Merkel for making, and it wasn't Merkel, it was the previous Social Democrat government in Germany, the gas pipeline thing. So the SNP MPs in Westminster are actually being used to set up questions to whack Merkel. And I'm not quite sure if a foreign affairs spokesman knew of that contribution. But we need to consider, I mean, these issues of where the SNP are need to be unpacked and considered. I think the position within NATO needs to be unpacked and considered. And the final point is a colleague from CND UK, I take it? Yeah, no one from CND Scotland, that's another interesting point. Talking about Sweden. And there's the advantage and there's the challenge. Sweden is outside NATO, yet has an intimate relationship with NATO. You know, the submarines go hunting American task forces. And therefore, if an SNP were to take his position either in or out, it probably would have that sort of intimate relationship at the moment. So it's not simply black and white.
Let me just explain why I organized the panel the way I did. There was a decision made for the fast lane demo that happened yesterday, that instead of having a series of politicians, they would have international visitors, which I think is a good idea. Once those international visitors were here, I thought, right? So,
fair point.
Yeah. So, but I agree, somewhere down the road, it would be good to have a NATO forum where we had different, internal. So, let me stop there. It would be really good if some women raised their hands, so oh, there you go. It's my fault.
I think this is a very important issue for a whole number of reasons. And I want to unpick a couple of the elements. I agree with pretty well everything that all the speakers have said about the nature and the development of NATO and the contradictions in it. Now, I apologise for being late. I was held up trying to find my way here, but I think we should be clear about understanding when Micah was speaking about that there is a legal analysis that says that it would be possible for existing NATO members to sign and join the TPNW. This is not a denial of the contradictions at the heart of that. It is a legal analysis, not a political analysis. And it is partly because of the understanding that NATO now is just sort of far-reaching. We all saw what happened at the end of the Cold War, when it looked for a moment as if it was possible that not only the Warsaw Pact, but also NATO, because the two were actually propping each other up. They were going in parallel, really, that NATO would fall. And there was all this excited talk about a peace dividend. And what actually happened was the military-industrial, or I actually think it needs to be called the military-industrial bureaucratic academic networks, the MEBA networks, not just military-industrial, because they are propped up and furthered and really embedded in the politics of all of the European countries, whether NATO members or not, also of Russia. And actually, if you go to China, you hear very similar kinds of debates going on. And they are all, in really basic terms, agreeing with each other about maintaining very high levels of military, and that includes nuclear armaments. And that, and this was, put forward in the early 1990s. They were losing at that time, as they saw it, the Russia kind of enemy image, demonized image of the Cold War, and they had to construct some alternative enemy to frighten. It's no surprise that we then got a series of wars that increasingly took NATO into the Middle East. And this was actually to maintain the military-industrial level of it. So we have to be working on a number of levels. Now what ICANN is doing, by identifying that it would be possible and that it is legally completely consistent with their current legal NATO options to join the treaty, is to actually challenge them and confront them with the fact that it's a choice to have nuclear weapons or not within NATO. But I think, we all recognize that if countries begin to go down that, and the crucial thing is the first country, actually, because the first country that gets it out in the public that they can be both a party to the treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons and also part of the NATO alliance, a number of others will follow. And then what is going to happen is that NATO actually has to confront the contradictions internally, because they don't go away. And so the final thing that I want to say, building on that and looking at Scotland and also the UK in particular, I mean, I found what you said very interesting, and I think, I understand political reasons why Angus Robertson and others in 2013 wanted the SNP to be seen to be, supporting NATO, but there is a fundamental contradiction there, and it is between that the issue of the nuclear opposition and NATO. And this is what's very, very interesting is in a lot of NATO states, at the moment mostly the academic bureaucratic side of the amoeba, if you like, is that they are scrambling to try to find arms control things they can do, short of joining the treaty, and trying to say that they can square the circle. And so you will find from quite a lot of different sides now, people say, oh, let's get a no first use. Oh, let's redouble efforts on de-alerting. Those are things that have been around for 30, 40 years. They didn't work then because fundamentally, no first use goes to the heart of a certain kind of deterrence policy. De-alerting is, they find a physical operational reason. But they're all coming up now, and they are backed by arms controllers that actually, not just arms controllers, but by the pro-NATO academics who are scrambling to find an argument to undermine the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
This isn't an academic question, but I think I've got a guest from Russia yesterday. I think I'm not the only person of an age who can remember a very popular song that Sting sang. I'm sure the Russians love their children too. And I think we're in a situation now where, then my generation will be encouraged to hate the Russians. We've never met Russian. And I think we've got governments all over the country that are now encouraging young people to hate the Russians again. And I think it's, it's all part and parcel of this control over fear. And, I'd love to see Sting's song being on the airwaves in Russia, all over again. And here.
Murdo, you can have your hand up.
This is one of the very few discussions I've ever managed to attend on the question of NATO, because they're far and few between. This is partly because of a need to drop a Chinese wall around the question of nuclear weapons. And that was essential for the purpose of having some focus on the question of nuclear weapons and not everything else. However, the damage that has done is it has failed to look at the entire structures that keep most of these nuclear weapons in place. Now, I have a big problem. I think that it's wrong to say NATO is a nuclear alliance, but it's also right. Because, ironically, you said NATO had intervened in the Middle East. Well, it hasn't. Never has it intervened in the Middle East. Every intervention so far in the Middle East has been what has been called a coalition of the willing. There have been NATO members that have been opposed to some of the interventions in the Middle East. The only intervention that has ever taken place, effectively, was Afghanistan. And that was... No, it wasn't a NATO intervention. That wasn't a NATO intervention. That was a coalition of the willing. And this is one of the features and problems of trying to define NATO. NATO in itself, because it's never been looked at, has never had an effective definition. And it can be anything you want it to be. It can either be a NATO, a nuclear organisation, or a non-nuclear organisation. Undoubtedly, this habit of working at numerous levels and as a mask for whole sets of policies where the dominant groups, largely the US, the UK and France, set the agenda, has been a problem for defining it, and a whole range of different reasonings are given by a number of countries for membership of NATO. Eastern Europe, I think you can figure out that one for yourself, although there has never been an intervention by the West in either Hungary, Poland or Czechoslovakia. All these features are part of NATO, and NATO itself is making itself more multi-layered. Some people here might have been rather bewildered to hear that Sweden is actually carrying out NATO policies. Well, NATO, it's not a member of NATO, but it's a member of this organisation that was created to mop up all the so-called neutral countries of Europe, the so-called partnerships for peace. And this structure is part and parcel of all these of the way that NATO is now developing. It is literally spreading. The ridiculous situation where the Republic of Colombia, the country that murders most trade unionists in the world, is now a global partner of NATO and has been for the last few months, is now allied with Turkey, which imprisons most journalists in the world, is an absurdity. But the problem has arisen that this has never been able to be talked about outside of the question of nuclear weapons. And this is part of the problem, because without this structure, it would not be easy to... It is the question of what in military terms would be called access or access denial. Territory to access, territory denial. And this is part and parcel of the problem of the whole thing, because a lot of fantasies are created about non-nuclear members of NATO. All members of NATO will eventually end up having to hold something that somehow links into nuclear weapons. Now, another problem that arises out of this...
You got to start wrapping up.
I'm going to just wrap up, Eric. Your firm chairmanship is admirable. There is another issue that is not being spoken about, and that is that there will have to be an alternative put across to NATO. And the failure to give adequate concentration on the question of what used to be called the non-aligned movement is one of the biggest failings that occurs in the rich world. Now, I'd like to have gone into the question of the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, because it's very clear, if you look at all the explanations and the way the explanations of national policies are structured in the UN documents, you can see quite clearly that this was done through the offices of NATO. It was quite clear, up to including even the masks on well, I'll let you go into that yourself, and I'll wind up to please Chair.
You did it, your hand.
Thank you. Thank you all for speaking on the panel. And I had a question for the speaker from CND and from Germany, because I heard strong examples and explanations of why NATO is well, a threat to peace, and how the different kinds of programs they use. But I would be interested in an analysis of why trying to topple NATO as the giant institute is practical, when we could also focus on a smaller piece, that is the nuclear weapons that NATO uses. Seeing as the meeting today was about NATO and the TPNW, I would be interested in that analysis.
Right. So you want? Actually, Micah should get a crack at it too, since you're. That's the vision. So why don't each of you speak, hopefully briefly, on answering his point, which is clearly the one that divides this group. So, want to start, Micah? Sure.
You know, frankly speaking, I have not so many different opinions about that. From the legal point, I think it's very clear that NATO countries could sign the ban treaty. That is, for me, obviously, it's a political question and a question of the power structures in the country, how they are doing it. And up to now, we have one NATO country which maybe will sign the ban treaty. This is Spain. Because the decision between Podemos and the socialist government related to the new budget includes the point that Spain will sign the ban treaty. What's happened immediately afterwards? There was a first intervention by the NATO ambassador in Madrid to the government, saying, you should not do this. And the ambassador of Spain in NATO in Brussels was immediately invited by Stoltenberg to explain what are the goals of Spain now. So there's a lot of pressure immediately. And we will see
But that's exactly
of Spain is strong enough. So it's a question of power structure.
Yes.
If NATO countries will sign the ban treaty. And we should be very cautious to make too many illusions how strong some NATO countries will be. I hope that Spain will continue doing this. We should support it. And then see what will the consequences for Belgium and Dutch, as from my understanding, its weakest points in the NATO chain opposing the ban treaty. And hopefully we will be successful. I was, you see, Greece. Greece was in the beginning willing to sign the ban treaty. But the power structure and the influence of the European Union and NATO was so strong that the Spanish foreign minister, whom I know, said, we can't do it. We cannot have another big problem with the European Union and with NATO. So, it is not a legal question, it's a political question.
Mm-hmm.
And this political question means we have to change the power relations in the different countries. And this is the main challenge for the peace movement in the world. And I love to work with people which are in favor of NATO, but for peace. But I'm always saying, I'm very much in doubt if you can really be for peace when you are not against NATO. Because, and this I am totally opposition to the speaker before me, because NATO is a war machine. And NATO is engaged in wars, not only in Afghanistan. I will say one example, you should never forget. Who was bombing Belgrade in 1980-99? Was it NATO? Or who was doing it? It was NATO, it was a NATO war. And who was occupying Kosovo with troops? Was it somewhere in the world? It was NATO. So, and I can make a long, long list, including the question who is really having the power for the Iraq war and who was leading the Libya attacks and aggressions. Then we are always coming to the word NATO. If it's on the first floor, on the second floor, this is an open question we can discuss. But without NATO, none of the actual wars are really happening for a longer time because all countries, including the United States, need the NATO infrastructure. They described it a little bit, and this is much more powerful than he described. And we have not discussed about drones up to now. Who is doing the drone war? So, I will not continue about that. So, for me, there is not such a big opposition to it. So, there is a legal, for me, a legal clear understanding. I'm absolutely following this Harvard professor. And then it's the political power structure, how we can change the situation, that we can get more NATO countries in the boat. And the only question I have always is, please be cautious to say that it will be a short-term process. We need a lot of power. And frankly speaking, I'm not so sure the peace movement is strong enough to get it through, but we will see.
So maybe just to say again, I don't think NATO is great. I'm not saying NATO is a peaceful organization, but just sort of emphasizing about the nuclear, but just to make that clear. And I think what all of the other speakers and also in the room have made very clear that NATO is such a sort of sprawling issue, and it's present in so many different ways. It is, to my mind, even a bigger issue than nuclear weapons, maybe. So I think that there is, as you said, there's no real disagreement on the content. It's more a different understanding maybe of the means towards the goal and not the goal itself. And I think what we've seen also in other disarmament issues is that it can be very effective to cut up a super big problem into smaller problems. And I think that's also what we've heard reference to before. So focusing on nuclear weapons as a specific issue might lead to more concrete steps that can be taken. And as you also said, NATO is struggling because of the TP limits. So by focusing on this very specific thing, we created something that is a problem to NATO. We've created internal divisions. So that is sort of an entry point into more, into achieving that goal. So I think just it's maybe pragmatism is a good way, even though it's not necessarily a good word, but it's just a different evaluation of what are the smaller steps that we can take towards achieving the same goal. And I just want to make a last example. I also work on the issue of cluster munitions, and my country used cluster munitions in the Balkans before, and was very much opposed to the prohibition of cluster munitions that we've had for several years. And they used cluster munitions in the context of NATO operations. And this weapon was very much part of the way they did their military operations. But we now have this treaty in place, and actually most NATO countries don't use cluster munitions anymore. And even the US, which has not joined the treaty, has practically stopped using them. So there are just different inroads we can make into making a dent in the thing that is NATO.
Yeah, I just agree with the other speakers really. I don't think with, you know, I think the question was why try to topple NATO rather than tackle the nuclear thing. I don't think that we're trying to do that. I think we're trying to make it clear what NATO is, because NATO doesn't get discussed, as has already been mentioned, at all really, in any really political party in Britain, as far as I am aware. The Labour Party has shirked it. Somebody said Jeremy Corbyn has changed. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn has changed his opinion on NATO. He's always been anti-NATO, and as far as I can see, he'll always remain anti-NATO. But it's the Labour Party that's not anti-NATO, and that's what needs to change. So I think we need to highlight more about what the role of NATO is and what exactly it is. It is propagating militarism. It's propagating the acceptance of nuclear weapons as a way of, you know, of defining some kind of policy, military or political. And I don't think that's desirable at all. So we need to, I understand why you don't want to bring NATO into some of these discussions. I quite understand that, because it diverts perhaps some of the discussion and takes away from the core kind of thing about the nuclear weapons treaty, and that's really important that we stick to that. But I also think we must make sure that people are aware of exactly what NATO is, its nature and what it's doing.
Let me just give a short intervention, and I'll call on the other people. First, there's New Zealand, which nobody has talked about. It's interesting because, in fact, New Zealand did do exactly what people are talking about here. New Zealand in 1987 passed a bill that said there will be no nuclear weapons entering our waters. And we will enforce that. And the first U.S. ship came. They said, "Are you carrying nuclear weapons?" Well, of course, the U.S. wouldn't say. They wouldn't let it dock. Guess what? That was the end of ANZUS. Right? That was the end. The U.S. said, "You're no longer part of this military alliance. You're not our ally." That's part of being an ally. You let our ships dock, we're not going to tell you whether they carry nuclear weapons. That's against our policy. That's it. That's what happened. In fact, the U.S. then proceeded to carry out retaliation. You know, they said that New Zealand ships couldn't use U.S. ports. So this has already happened once. I don't know why people expect it's going to be different. Now, what worries me is, and it's the S&P that particularly worries me. You said Denmark and Norway. Well, the truth is that the U.S. uses bases nuclear weapons in Denmark and Norway on the same basis. Don't ask, don't tell. Right? So the Danish government can say, we don't know if there's any nuclear, no, as far as we know, there's no nuclear weapons here. But of course, they don't ask the United States, because they really seriously said to the U.S., does that ship contain missiles carrying nuclear weapons? The U.S. would say, we're not going to say. It's against our policy, and we're going to dock that boat. If you don't agree, you're out of NATO, because that's what NATO is. You follow the U.S. for a military policy. That's what it's about. Everybody understands that, who's in the government. They understand that that's what it's about. So I'm a little bit puzzled. And what worries me is we'll have a, quote, independent Scotland that's part of NATO, and I can see Sturgeon saying the same thing. I don't know of any nuclear weapons here. Nuclear weapons? No.
I think it's out of the question to respond to that in this convocation.
That's what worries me about what's going to happen in the future. So I wish people would respond. Like, the legalities don't really interest me a whole lot. I want to know, you know, critically, we had the example of New Zealand. Why is it going to be any different if it's UK or Denmark or Holland or whatever? It's the same United States. It's, in fact, got more nuclear weapons than it ever had before. They've now got tactical nuclear weapons that can be, you know, used in short wars and full scale. Maybe people could answer that question who feel that there's a way out of having a NATO without nuclear weapons, because I don't see it. Brian?
Sorry, this
Why do we have NATO? What's it for? Very simply explained, it's to get the Germans down, the Russians out, and the Americans in.
Yeah.
That, in one sentence, that's what NATO is for.
Yeah.
The hyper-cold war, that's what it's for. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a very brief time, a golden opportunity, when we could have created a pan-European security system, but excluding the Americans, because the Americans were only in it because of the Second World War. The Second World War is long, long gone now. We should have constructed a pan-European system, specifically excluding the Americans, aligning Russia and what Gorbachev called nasz obcy Europejski dom, or a common European home. What a lovely expression.
Yes.
Nasz obcy Europejski dom. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in Russian. It's beautiful in any language, but we didn't do it. We blew it. Why the hell are British troops in Estonia? Why are British troops in Ukraine? For Christ's sake, why are they there? What threat is Ukraine to us? Is Estonia going to invade Scotland? No. NATO has become more and more a monstrosity. I actually left the SNP bill in 2013 when they passed that pro-NATO resolution. I've since rejoined it because I've come to the conclusion that we're not going to get independence by any other means other than by the SNP. But NATO's an abomination. It's an abomination. What the hell is it? Right?
What I was, sorry, I've lost three points and I've lost them all. Focus, right, I'm not CND, I'm not nuclear. We need greater transparency on all weapons and cluster, whatever, as far as I'm aware, and don't quote me, and don't quote me, as far as I'm aware, there's a ship sitting off Australia and New Zealand, a submarine with technology on it that can take out people, disintegrate people, but leave the infrastructure. What are we blowing the planet for? But we need transparency in all these weapons, right? Which is why I ended up with the other mini-stroke. But what about John Finney? He's walked away for the SNP. You know, like, put him in your panel the next time.
Okay. Dave.
Yeah, I'd just like to expand a little on what Brian said. I mean, what's the threat? We've all watched on television the appalling things that were happening in Syria by the Russians. You want an extra airfield. They've to tow the Admiral Kutsinov around because its nuclear engines don't work. I mean, the state of the Russian military technology is absolutely appalling, right? But we've been building them up as the same level of threat they had, and there's not going to be a huge invasion of Russian tanks from the east because they'll break down halfway through Poland, right? No, and yet we're not, and it's fine. We need to talk NATO down, but we also need. It seems to me we're not addressing the nature of the threat that once truly existed. Perhaps maybe that's always a fantasy, but the threat is much smaller than it used to be.
Russophobia has a deep and ancient history in British society. It goes back to the Crimean, before the Crimean War, the Turkish War. There's a music hall song. We don't want to fight. We don't want to war. But we've got the tanks. We've got the troops. We've got the money. And by jingo, we'll do it if we have to. That's where the word jingoism comes from. It's a music hall chorus from Victorian times. Jingoism, and that's still the same Union Jackery that guides us.
This is probably a facetious comment, but it does seem that there is one link between NATO and our current situation, in that it is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and most of the debate has not covered outside of the European context. We are not looking at what China is viewing our world as. Our world isn't Europe. Our world, most of our world, is outside of the European context. And I think we need to be more aware that we are small fry now. In many cases, okay, the military-industrial complex, etc., may be in it. I mean, there's big profits. But actually what the planning is going on outside is a much more global, Asia-based future for all of us. And we have to, therefore, I think, look at how the NATO machinations are leading to that part of the world, rather than to Russia.
But it is.
It is, but
You know, North.
I mean, in the context of this discussion, we are sort
But
of
when you say
concentrating on
NATO,
Europe.
the word is a lie. NATO is not any longer North Atlantic.
Yeah, I know.
NATO has a deep military agreement with Japan,
Yeah.
with South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, even India. And when you are looking to the landscape of all these countries, then you need the surroundings of China.
Yeah.
So when we are speaking about NATO, we are speaking about the global military alliance of the world. The North Atlantic time is a long time over.
Yeah, of course.
It also sets itself up as the security arm of the United Nations as well and tries to sell itself that way.
Steve?
Can I just make 2 points? One fraction, John Finney has attended one of the meetings, but being an MSP, he hasn't got that much time. The facetious point I've got is, if we didn't spend thousands, millions of pounds on rebuilding the infrastructure of the old Eastern European countries, then we wouldn't have to hope that tanks break down, because the roads would be so bad they wouldn't get here anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask the panel about the Spanish situation, and for you to come back in to talk about what's happening in Spain. Obviously, it seems to be the most important issue that has come out of what I've heard this weekend in terms of the ban treaty, and obviously looking at what ICANN is going to be doing in the next year to support the Spanish peace movement.
Yeah.
And we have within Scotland built strong alliances with Catalonia, and what can we do in terms of the Scottish peace movement to support Catalonia, and obviously the difficult situation that you're in. And I want to maybe hear a bit more about what the Dublin conference is going to be taking forward as well. What are the practical actions? I admit you said yes, so we need more action amongst peace activists. We need to build a strong movement here, and we need to learn from this event. What do we need to do next? Thank you.
So there are really 2 different questions, but let Rosaire first start with what's going on with Catalonia.
I think I can answer you some things. The first thing for me, of course, I am not a NATO expert. I have a fighting person. I think it will be good to put stress in the street, the public opinions. Each opinion matters.
Yes.
Each opinion, each individual. Because, for example, when it was a referendum about NATO or yes or not, people in Spain said yes, people in Catalonia said no. It's not for nothing. I think Catalonia is more committed with some things. Not all the things, of course. And I think it's very, very important to put the fight in the streets and to not only call people for fight, but first of that, hearing people, what is your problem, what is your need, because people need to eat, to sleep properly, and then we can talk about another things. I think it's the most important thing. The fight is in the streets, or could be in the streets. And for us, for the independence in Catalonia, some people said independence, independence as a slogan, as a motto, but only this. And for our party, the CIP, we said independence, but for changing everything, not independence, and not nothing else, because if you have independence and people are dying in the street, and we are in the NATO, we are in the NATO, I don't know the word.
NATO partner.
Okay, then why? Why for independence? It's the most important thing for us is that.
I just want
So
to respond
Dave-
to her the question.
Yeah, so Dave was going to answer the question about what the Dublin conference could bring in terms of networking.
Yeah, I think I briefly said that there are basically two international networks that have been set up, anti-bases networks. Really, one is based in America, the other was in Europe. So one was part of the IPB, part of the conference that was going on at IPB and in Europe. And then there was one in America from a number of American activists and groups there. Now, in Dublin, this is kind of a chance for it to come together because, you know, it's basically the American group who are setting up the conference in Dublin. So it's bringing it to Europe. Now, there are differences of opinion in those two kind of operations, like there are in every kind of movement that ever kind of is created. But hopefully we can come together and create a wide international movement against military bases, because it's extremely important that we do that. I mean, these military bases, as I say, they're taking on different guises. You know, we can't always recognize what they are or what they do. We need to be much more aware of what they are and where they are. So the strategy is to be determined at the conference, basically. We need to sort of sit around and talk about how we cooperate and bring this into an international widespread movement.
You know, we have 1,000 military bases in the world, 800 by the US. But we have an enlargement of the military bases above all in South America. We have in the last 2 years 25 new US bases in Latin America, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil. We have a huge number of new military bases in Asia. So it is a very important topic. And you know, we had a military bases network at the end of the last century. It was founded in Ecuador, where the Ecuadorian government was throwing out the US military bases under Korea. But it was too weak and it failed. So we are trying to reconstruct a worldwide anti-military bases network. That is the huge chance of Dublin. And you know, like always, quite often in life, two different sides of the world, they start developing it. The US was developing it in the States, obviously, because they have so many military bases. And we were doing this around Ramstein, about the US Air Base in Ramstein, because this is the key place for all drones war. No drones war without Ramstein, because the satellite system in Ramstein must lead the drones to their final goal. So we were founding their European or also international. Now we have to bring it together. There's a great chance. And I hope a lot of you will come to Dublin. Dave is speaking there, some of my colleagues from the NATO network are speaking there. So let's use the chance and develop, and then I hope that we can create at the end of Dublin a common action. Maybe say we want to have a week of action next year, we will meet again somewhere, so that is the goal, and I think we have a really good chance for a new development and a new push. This is a part of the answer to actions, but I will say a little bit more later to answer to your question.
Yeah, hopefully this forum will encourage people here in Scotland to maybe go to Dublin if possible, but for sure make sure that we have some kind of group here that's working on these kind of issues. It seems like C&D would be a good umbrella for that, but that we can start really addressing these kind of issues as a priority. NATO, imperial wars, the alliance, all that kind of stuff.
I'd like to hear from Rebecca, if that's okay, about the ICANN action.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Micah may well respond as well. That, you know, we've got to be very, very realistic. We're absolutely, yes, it's good news to hear that this is this agreement with Podemos was even made, because it absolutely increases the pressure but we're also aware of all the pressure that's going to come in the other direction. Frankly, realistically, I would expect that the next thing is that they're going to have some kind of an internal, commission inquiry into looking at how to do that in relation to continuing to be part of NATO, because that's what's happening with Iceland, with Germany, with Sweden, which isn't part of NATO, but nevertheless, as we've all heard, is absolutely part of this greater NATO, if you like. So, we welcome all of these steps, but we recognise it's actually going to be the public movement. It's the public pressure, public pressure on the parliamentarians. It's the public movement that is going to shift it. And as I said earlier, if we can, shift one, then all those other legalistic, technical arguments that get in the way start to crumble in a number of other countries. But the point that Anne raised there, I think, goes to what Rainer was saying. I think it's very, very important to recognise that NATO isn't about Europe now. It's not, it's so much more than that. And it has to be tackled on the so much more. And just as in the 80s, there we were at Greenham Common and FAS8 focusing on the nuclear weapons being brought in to this country, but actually making huge amounts of networking with Japan, with the Philippines, with South Koreans, with all those other countries in the Pacific in particular, and obviously a whole other slew within Europe, about just that expansion of militarism through the bases. And I don't understand why you're so starry-eyed about New Zealand from the 80s, because actually in a lot of relevant aspects, we've heard about Five Eyes. New Zealand is absolutely integrated into elements of NATO. So let's be honest and let's be realistic about this. We actually need to be, breaking it apart. Nuclear weapons keep being said to be the glue that holds NATO together. I think that's, on the one hand, absurd. On the other hand, it's useful. Because if we can dissolve some of that glue using the treaty, quite a lot of other things start to break up. But they're not going to break up unless there is this much more globalized movement against the increasing use of bases, intelligence, drones targeting, all of those things. Because in the Pacific, I can tell you, it's not so much about Russia, it's about China. But it is still the construction of the next enemy and the demonization of the next enemy. And that's what we actually have to tackle. The nuclear weapons part is one aspect that ICANN is doing its very, very best to change the conditions by tackling this. Not naively thinking we can solve it all by tackling this part of it, but that we can melt some of that glue, and that can break things apart. But there's a whole lot more work that needs to be done globally to get away from these military alliances that are constructing enemies. And let's recognise the enemy's also being constructed by the Russian establishment, by the Chinese establishment in relation to us. We have to make common cause with these. We mustn't be naive about it. We have to change this all over the place.
I'm looking for somebody who hasn't spoken.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eric. Oh, and thank you. And thank you for your question to Spain. That's what I was raising my hand for earlier. And thank you. And you're absolutely right, Rebecca, about it hasn't been for a long time for us that Raptors came, the military-industrial complex. It's definitely the we call it the military-industrial congressional university complex, in which it is. That's what it's been in America. And I'm sitting next to Katya for a very good reason, perhaps by chance, but we like each other. And that's the way it really is. That is reality. As to your point, Russia and the United States, the peoples, we get along. So this is really absurd what's been happening. And also, as you said, in 1990, there was absolutely no reason for us to reposition our nukes everywhere. When that wall came down, we should have dissolved NATO. I really thank you, Eric. This is a fantastic panel. I'm getting a lot out of it. And each of you that has spoken from an American, I've done a lot of lobbying with my representatives in the United States, And what I can tell you, I consistently hear, is that our allies, some of you have heard this before, but our allies, Europe, England, Germany, really need us. We have to be loyal to them, we have to protect them. And this is the big pushback I get when I try to speak about nuclear weapons, is how you here in Scotland especially need our protection, even though you get your own nukes here, just a couple of miles away. But I get this kind of back. So I hope Dublin decides their first action will all to take that whole conference and come right into my capital, because we really desperately I need help. I'm telling my representatives, I don't, DC, I don't think the people of the world really need our protection. I think some people in Scotland don't see our nukes and our nuclear industry as protecting them and for your safety. So the more voices, it helps us, those who are in the United States campaigning. Your voice really helps. And I was thinking, my question would be, is if you think you really, all of you here, can get together and keep thinking of some kind of joint statement with you all. And I know there's a lot of difference of opinions about NATO, and I hear them. And everything is valid. I really, what concerns me about every movement, I'm sorry I'm going on, it is the divisions. And I really think we have to work on ourselves with forgiveness and broadening our own perspectives, and including the many different paths to getting rid of nukes. So I like to stand, but I really would love, what do you think about, at some point, maybe not right after this meeting, but thinking about the 4 of you, the 5 of you, getting, or perhaps a report on this little meeting that we've had here would be sufficient enough, Eric, to forward me, and I'd love to get that out. Something.
We're going to have a video.
Okay.
There's going to be a video.
You can cut me out of it.
But, no,
I love you to, I love your voices. Thank you. God bless.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're listening to what Rosaire says about being in the street and about organizing, locales, on the ground. This is really so critical. I mean, to get more information out, to link our issues, the austerity, business going on with our governments and so on. There's so many issues that need to get linked up, and I think that we need to be on the street making those points and making it more real to people so they will pay attention and try to understand better what the situation is with NATO.
Can I just make a comment quickly?
Yes.
Just to say that, I don't know how many of you know, there is a network in Europe, No to War, No to NATO. I don't know that any people from Scotland are involved in that, so it would be great if maybe you could join in with that. There is a website, No to War, No to NATO, and I think there's a Facebook page and all that kind of stuff. So it's all there, we just need to join in, or you just need to join in.
And we are coming to the States, to the NATO summit.
It happens in the States.
Yeah, I'm from German Peace Movement, Hubert, my name, and I wanted to take the view on the relationship between internal and external politics. Of mostly all of the NATO states are the Western industrialized, so-called civilized states. And nearly all of them are now in a state where the society is about to break apart between very few, very rich people and more people getting poorer and poorer. And you can feel the tension in near all of these countries that there are social uprisings and fightings. And I think that a lot of the military threatening and the building up of enemies like Russia is also has got a function in their own society to keep the people quiet, because there is the bad Russian standing outside the door. So don't rise up, don't do anything against our government because we are threatened from the outside. And that's a kind of policy that is, yeah, I see in everywhere the same, and there's something where I think we cannot wait for the day that all of the NATO states coming together and saying, well, now we are going to dissolve NATO like the Warsaw Treaty, and it will never happen in my view. This day will never come. The only way to get things done, to get forward, is for every country itself to say, no, we get out of this. And so in the end, I think it will be, well, in the United States, of course, and yeah, I think UK as one of the closest allies, and perhaps France, who has also got a long imperialistic tradition, which is, yeah, also in all the NATO concept, it's very much of the, yeah, once the British Empire, the French Empire, and the old empires working under the shield of the NATO structure, but more or less doing the same shit they did all the time. Sorry for the word, but yeah. And that's important to get the social fights.
The same things.
Yeah.
Don't forget about this. Of course, we used also the situation.
Yes. So yeah, it's not only Western, but I mean, to understand that it's the internal fights, and it's very important. I think it was Reiner who said, to get the networks and connections between peace movement and social movement. And also, I mean, I'm in Germany very much involved in environmental movements. I don't know if you've heard about the fights for the Hamburg forest. It's at the moment, it's a very big issue in Germany. There were about 150 activists living in a forest, the oldest forest of Germany, 12,000 years old, and they came with 3,500 policemen to get the people out of the forest, to cut it and dig up the coal. And well, 2 days later, there were 10,000 protesters against the police. And now that's why I wear this black ribbon. There was one journalist who was on the side of the activists. He died. He fell from a tree. And there are these fights. I feel in Germany, in this fight, some years ago, we were just a few activists and something like, well, okay, those left-wing extremists and chaotic and anarchists and more. And now there are more and more of this really normal people who normally say, well, all politics, no, get away with the politics, I don't want to know anything about it.
Yeah.
They get interested and say, well, there is no, when we keep on destroying our own resources, our forests and our land and what we need to live, and follow only the interests of the big money and big companies, it doesn't work. We have to fight against it, and that's one hope for change.
Yeah, in that context, and about austerity on the streets, I would really urge you need to follow through on rethinking security. People need to understand how all these aspects are interlinked. It's up to us to talk to people about this. I don't think there's any other way. And so that will get them to understand what's going on. I mean, it's almost fascist what's happening. People need to appreciate what's going on. Rethinking security.
You know what, I think what we should do now, we got a few minutes before 4, let the 4 speakers have 3 minutes, so 3.
Could you ask them, they touched about cyber warfare before, you know, like the whole thought form's got to change with cyber warfare. You know,
I don't know how much they can cover briefly, but do it, each wrap up what you want to say, and yeah, you want to start, Dave?
Okay, where to start? Okay, cyber warfare. Well, this is one of the big, huge things that's consuming, really, all sides, I think, who have the technology, and even some who don't. So it's a big issue because we don't know what's going on. We can't, and we talk, people talk about transparency, but that's one thing that is not transparent. We don't know what's involved, we don't know who's involved, we don't know whereabouts it's being taken place. So it's a huge problem for everybody. And we're told all kinds of stories. Do we believe them? Do we not believe them? Have we had attacks from China, Russia? I'm sure we have, but we've also attacked them too. So, and this can lead to, this can lead to a war-type situation, as I mentioned. If it's considered an attack under NATO's kind of policies, then it could be a military response if they see fit. And it could be used as an excuse for military response. So what we can do about it, we need to really recruit more people who are into the technology and get them to explain to us, or to particularly to kind of not to have anything to do with that kind of kind of technology. It's a bit too late, but they're recruiting a lot of young, very capable people into these kind of systems who get carried away with the technology and with the ideas behind it, rather than what it's leading to, don't understand perhaps, or don't bother to think about too much about what it's all coming up to. So it is a huge problem. But NATO is part of that, and it's using it. It's not really. It's using it as a tool. So we need to understand that too. I'll probably give some time for some other people.
Okay, Ryan?
I will concentrate on actions, because what to do now. But I think 3 or 4 points. First, I think the Dublin Conference, or the consequence of the Dublin Conference, is an important issue. Second, 2% GDP for military budget in all the European countries means to double the military budgets in many of the European countries. This is impossible without reduction of social welfare, no money for science, no money for education, and. So for common activities with the trade unions, with broad coalition with the churches, environmental group, the question of military budget and disarmament is a very, very important question, because it tackles the life conditions of millions of people. So we have to enlarge the disarmament movement much more than in the past. Third is how to continue with the ban treaty. And I think maybe we are coming to a common action in Europe and maybe worldwide when we have the second year of the ban treaty, 7th of July. We will do some actions in Brüssel where the US nuclear weapons are lying. And maybe we can combine this with other activities in Scotland and other military bases and really come to common action to enlarge our protest and the support for the ban treaty. This could be a good possibility. And maybe we together have to go to Madrid in a very short term to support the Spanish government. I cannot believe that NATO will not develop a lot of power to stop these developments. So maybe we are asked to go there and to support our Spanish colleagues and friends in their activities. My summary is for NATO, because we will not abolish NATO during the next years. What we need is much more public awareness about NATO. What is NATO? Because we have not discussed about NATO in many, many countries about years. So so we have to develop these discussions. And the next NATO activities will be the 70th anniversary. NATO will come on 4th of April, 70 years old. It is time to go to pension. I don't believe it. But and we will definitely have actions at that day. In the world and at the place where the celebration will be, and maybe it will be in Washington. So that we have to develop a lot of actions in Washington. But maybe all NATO countries, or the most of the NATO countries, actions are needed. That is my main point, and this means to rethinking security. And I really would like, as a German, in the tradition of Willy Brandt, but also Olaf Palme and Bruno Kreisky, to say, when we are not coming back to the politics of common security, which includes the security of all countries, we will not solve these problems of confrontation that we have up to now, and we will not overcome militarism So we have to come back to the politics of common security.
Okay.
Thanks. I also just wanted to say about some very concrete actions that ICANN will be developing over the coming year. Pax and ICANN together have a divestment campaign that we call Don't Make the Bomb. And in this campaign we really focus on the companies that are involved in the production and maintenance of the nuclear weapons, including Trident. So really what we've heard here a lot about is targeting the military industrial complex, targeting the companies. This is really one of the ways that we also want to do, target those nuclear weapon producers. And it involves very concrete action, like just people sending messages to their banks. So ICANN will be doing a lot of actions around this in the coming year, including an action next week targeting a French bank, BNP Paribas. And there's also a very active campaign in Scotland, actually, where we work together. Maybe some of you know Linda Pearson. She's with the Edinburgh Peace and Justice Centre, and she's done a really amazing research on the investments by Scottish public pension funds, including, for example, the pension funds of the members of the Scottish Parliament that are invested in some of the companies involved in Trident. So there's this really great campaign to get those funds out. So yeah, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of concrete actions that can be taken.
Sarah?
Yes, I think one of the problems is you are far away of the Mediterranean Sea because we are in the shores of the Mediterranean Sea and we can't see the suffering, the people dying, and it's very important to think of this. I must read because of my English. We are on the shores of the Mediterranean and we have the opportunity to become a country that supports and provides justice, peace and solidarity, not oppression and death. We have the opportunity to build a new framework or international relations that is based on these values. We live on the shores of the Mediterranean and we have this opportunity. And you know, the king of the Spanish king is one of the great dealers with weapons.
Yeah.
Then out the monarchy, we need a republic, and we can come to Madrid with
I'm sorry, there's another thing I meant to mention and forgot. I'm sure you must know about the joint warrior exercises off the coast of Scotland, twice a year. I mean, that's another thing that needs to be highlighted. The NATO exercises, sea exercises. You know, Scotland's involved in that. So, you know, where's the protest? Where are the letters to the newspapers, etc., etc.?
Tied into that base, that's why they do it up there. Kate, it's got to be real quick though.
I'm just going to be very quick. I can say that I know it was an admin mistake. Rebecca, she's here. And I think we'd like to do the Scottish hospitality and ask her to round up as well. But everybody please.
I actually just want to reinforce the message that I've heard from the other four. I think that this has been the right kind of combination of action, forward-looking, and solidarity thinking, and we need really just to recognise, you know, the huge tentacles of NATO in all aspects of our lives. But at the same time, we need to identify the different parts of those tentacles that we can take away, that we can remove without new ones growing. And then without new ones growing is going to be an important part. As Rainer said, there's also, parallel to this, there's actually a movement about the increasing militarization of Europe through other means, the EU being one of them. So that's a huge task. But I think we've heard quite a lot of very practical and useful, and also from all of you, and I'm, you know, I just want to really thank all of you for very, very constructive participation in this.
Can we thank Kate though, because her event on Friday was the answer.
Having a laugh as well.
No, it was brilliant, and that's what we need more of.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank Eric for putting this event together. It's been terrific, Eric. We needed another 2 hours. And yeah, just a wonderful
Needed a tea
event.
break and then just...
Yeah, the only other thing I want to say, for those of you who are interested in continuing the networking process, if you just stay over and maybe we can at least have a little sign-up sheet so that we can all stay in contact. And after the Dublin conference, we'll get reports and move from here.